First thing I'm going to ask is for you to tell us your name, so it'll be on tape.
Blanche Stern.
Blanche, tell me a little bit about what life was like for you before the war, growing up in Germany.
Very good, very happy life. My parents were comfortable, and I lived just a normal life until it started in Germany. I had my schooling, my dancing lessons, my music lessons, had anything anybody can ask for.
What kind of education did you have, both your secular education and your Jewish education?
I went went 10 years in a private parochial school, in two different schools, and my education was equal to high school graduation plus.
When you say parochial, was it a Jewish school?
Yes.
And that was pretty common in those days?
In the bigger cities, yes. It was a private school.
What kind of activities, you mentioned a little bit your dancing lessons and things, were you involved in any youth groups of any sort?
Yes, I went to Bar Kochba, Blau-Weiß, those were Jewish organizations. But I had private clubs. We went in a club where we spoke English and French, and this came very handy to me when we came over here. And I really can't remember all the things, but I have done a lot of things which were quite interesting, and I have very precious memories of that time.
Generally, you really enjoyed your childhood years. The reason I asked that is many others that I interviewed, they were very troubled times.
Yes, I was very fortunate because I was 23 years old when that whole thing really happened. So until 23, those are the years where you really enjoy your youth. And as I said before, I have very precious memories.
What, when you talk about having gone to Jewish schools, was your family very religious?
No. But it was a thing to do. Those were private schools, and they thought it would be good to have Jewish education at the same time.
And did your family go to the synagogue a lot and things like that?
Yes, on holidays and on Shabbat quite often. They didn't practice religion that much, but I still have a very good background, and I think I know a lot when it comes to Jewish education.
And what, in general, if you could just describe for us a little bit what life was like, not just for you, but all the Jews in your hometown in the years prior to the war?
I lived in a town where there were 30,000 Jews, and my whole life was really more or less exposed to Jewish people. And it was, like I said, it was very comfortable. We got together socially, and as a matter of fact, I just come back from Israel, and I talked to one of the women I went to school with, and we just talked how wonderful it was, how we got together every week when we were girls, and just enjoyed everything what we've been doing. And of course I was protected by my both parents, and I had a brother who also lived here and passed away. So, I mean, it was just a life anybody can ask for until the whole thing happened.
How did the Nazis' rule first affect you?
First of all, of course, there was the 1st of April, which they had to close all the Jewish stores, and they rounded up merchants at a certain place, and they had to go walk through town and looked at and spat at, and of course everybody was I mean, the non-Jews, most of them were very indifferent or happy about it. And there was one incident I really want to, I worked at my father's business. I was the secretary there. And we had a woman who really was a very nice, devoted person, not Jewish. And we never even thought that she had anything against Jews. And as those merchants, which I was telling you, walked by, we had our business in the main street on the third floor or the second floor, and as they walked by there, she said, well, maybe they did something wrong after all.
And you heard this?
Yes, yes. And of course, this shocked everybody a lot. So this was my first reaction.
How old were you at that point?
22. And my second reaction, you like to hear that?
Yes, please.
My second reaction, in that summer in 1933, I went to visit a friend of mine in Berlin. And one day I was sitting on the street in a cafe, which was very customary there. I saw the Nazis, the SS or SR, passing by in a group, 40, 50, I don't know. They were singing, and I just caught the words, when, I said in German first, wenn Judenblut vom Messer spritzt, dann geht's noch mal so gut. Meaning, if Jewish blood splashes from the knife, everything goes twice as well. And then I made up my mind, that's it. I'm not going to stay in, Germany. And I'm sorry. I came home and I said to my parents, I'm going to leave. I'm not going to stay here. And I really wanted to go to Palestine at that time, and my parents said it's so far. In these days, it was really just a very small country. And they talked me out of it. I said, why don't you go to Belgium? You know people there, you have some relatives there, and if the whole thing is over soon, which everybody hoped, of course, you can come back. So in November in 1933, I left. And I met my husband there and we got married. And I lived then in Brussels. Now, what would you like to know now?
Oh, no, this is fascinating. I'm just taking a few little notes here.
We lived in Brussels until May 1940. Everything was fine. My child was born there and we had a very nice time. We knew what was going on in Germany, and but we decided to stay because we could stick it out. But in the night of the 10th of May, we woke up in the middle of the night, and that's when the Germans invaded the lowlands. The war had already started in 1939, but it didn't really affect us, which was very foolish, but this is hindsight. So the men were arrested to go to a place where they collected all the alien enemies, because we were still Germans, we did not have the citizenship. My husband was hurt through something fell on our back porch, and he was trying to carry some of the children, the neighbors' children, in the basement, and he was hurt, and he was spared to go to that camp. Then a week later, when the Germans came closer and closer, my husband, my child, and my both parents, we went in the car and we were trying to go to the coast. And we went there, got into some friend's house where we tried to spend the night. So this was very crowded, and my mother and my child and myself, we spent the night in the house. My father and my husband decided to stay in the car overnight. Are you really interested in that?
Yes.
So they, in the morning, they decided to get out of the car and were walking on the street, and the police came and asked for their papers, and since the papers were Germans, they were arrested, put to prison.
Your father and your husband?
My father and my husband. And we didn't know what happened, and all of a sudden a guy with a bike came by and gave us a little slip from my father, which said, no matter what it costs, get out. So we tried to get out, and we were caught actually in the Battle of Dunkirk, which was quite an event now.
Yeah, no
but
kidding.
at the time we just tried to save our life. And we crossed the border and we went into France, and we drove and drove till we were out of gasoline. You were too young, but maybe you have seen the picture somewhere where the people walked and cars after cars. And the poor people, I always felt sorry for them. They were trying to carry their belongings, and they threw this away and that away because they couldn't carry it anymore. So when we finally got out of gas, we had to spend the whole day in line to get some more gas. And then the car broke down. And we asked somebody to pull us, which they did. And then the police asked different people for the papers. When they say we had German papers, they disconnected our car and they put us in jail. And then a few days later...
This was in France?
In France,
Do you
yes.
remember which town?
Yes. In fact, it was a very well-known town, Le Mans, you know, where they have the car races?
Sure.
And we've been there in it wasn't a prison anymore, it was a collecting center where they collected all the women. I can't remember if they had some men too. They may have put the men somewhere else, because I remember we slept on straw, hundreds of women on the floor, of course. I mean, I can't go into details to tell you what happened there, but then one day they told us they're going to ship us somewhere. They were not ugly to us, the French people. I mean, we just were enemies to them, and they wanted to get us out of the way.
Let me back up just a little bit.
Yes, ma'am.
I make sure we understand exactly what happened. You left Germany in 1933.
Right.
And then you lived in Brussels for about 7 years with your husband.
Right.
And when you left Belgium, he was still in jail with your father?
Yes. Yes.
So when you were traveling through France, it was just your mom and you and your son?
Yes. We went with some friends.
And some friends.
Right.
And what was the whole feeling like from that period? You described the very beginning, the rise of Nazi power and your first memories in your hometown. But in Belgium, for example, in between 1933 and 1940, what was it like? I mean, did you feel free? Were you removed from all the problems?
Yes, yes.
But what kind of letters were you getting from your family back in Germany?
That, of course, my family lived there until 1939.
In Germany?
In Germany. And they left after the Kristallnacht. You know, of course, needless to say, we were terribly worried about what happened to them, and we phoned and wrote, and they finally decided to leave. They thought they could stick it out in Germany.
What made them think they could stick it out? What was life like for them between 33 and 39?
In a big town, in a city like Frankfurt, it was not as bad as you probably find out from the others, like from Höchst, who lived through a horrible life, because they knew everybody in those towns. But in Frankfurt, more or less, I mean, they knew the Jews were not allowed to go here, and they were not allowed to have German maids. You heard of Rassenschande and all those things. But unfortunately, the people there, a lot of them still thought they stick it out. My father had a very flourishing business, and that's why a lot of people were caught in the last minute, and they couldn't get out. My parents, luckily, they could get out, and came to Brussels then.
You know, a lot of people in this country, you always hear people say, oh, something like that could never happen here. Was it the same kind of feeling when you were growing up, and especially after you left, when your parents stayed? Did they have any idea how bad it could get?
No. There was a big mistake made by the Jews. Hitler wrote a book, Mein Kampf. You heard of that?
Of course.
And instead of us reading that book, we said very foolishly, oh no, we're not going to read it. We're not going to support that, the sale of that book. And we did not know what was going on. They also had a very anti-Semitic newspaper, Der Stürmer. Nobody wanted to read it. Nobody wanted to hear about it. So in other words, we played, what do you call it, stick your head in the sand? Ostrich. And that's what most people did. Of course, there were some smart people who left already in 1933 And they were able to take a lot of their money with them, especially if they had a lot, they could have half of it, which was better than when my family left, they could take 10 marks. They couldn't take anything out except what they tried to get out under the carpet or on the table.
I was in Hungary a few years ago and looking at some of the things that were saved from before the war, and there were a lot of propaganda against the Jews. Was it the same way in Germany from what your parents told you?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. But back to 1939, your parents finally, they just had enough.
Yes.
And were they, at this point when they decided to leave, were they weren't able to continue their business as they had before, were they?
In Frankfurt? Yes, they were, until, yes. But then, instead of selling the business or instead of doing something, it was just taken away from them.
And that's when they left?
That's when they left.
Okay, so they joined you in Brussels, and that's when your father and your husband were taken prisoner.
Right.
We left off where you were talking about your experiences in France, but I wonder if you could just tell us what happened with your father and your husband.
It's very simple. If you can visualize the map, the Germans cut them off. They were still in that prison, and that was already cut off. You know, when they called all the British, and the British left, and they left all their merchandise, all their food, everything there, and they were in this part of Belgium while we were already out. I mean, I could sign it to you, could make a map of it, but you should be able, I mean, if you are familiar with it, how it was. And therefore they were in the occupied part of Belgium, while we were in the non-occupied, and we were going south, and that's when they caught us.
Did they ever get out?
Yes.
What happened to them after they were, how long were they held in Belgium?
Just a few days. Because they wanted them out of there because they didn't know what could happen, and they sent them back to Brussels. And of course I hadn't heard from neither one of them, neither did my mother, until much later. And we struggled along. They took us to a concentration camp, Gurs they called it, and we've been there from end of May until the middle of September, and we were just lucky that we could get out.
You're talking about your mom and you and your
Yes,
son and
yes,
friends.
yes.
Was your husband and your father with you at that time?
No, they were in Brussels. They sent them back, and they lived in their own places. And in the beginning, it was all right for them. But then, little after little, it got worse, and my husband finally, through some false papers, he could get out. My father didn't want to leave until my mother would come back, which she did also through false papers. And so my parents lived in Brussels until the end of the war. And this is what I wonder if you like to hear, just a couple of those incidents, what happened to them.
I do want to hear them. I just want to understand.
Go
So
ahead.
you were in France with your
Right.
mom, and then she went back?
My mother went back, and my husband came to find us through some connections they got, because we were in the, one part was a Vichy,
Right.
and then we were in the other part, and somehow the mail was smuggled, and he found out where we were. When we were dismissed from that camp, I mean, after all, we didn't do anything. We went to Toulouse, into a very lousy little place. I didn't have a lot of money with me. So my son and my mother and I, we stayed in that place, and then my mother went back, and my husband found us in that hotel. And
When
What
did
is
you
it?
go to camp in this whole, yeah, okay.
France now.
Okay. What year was it when you were in France, when you got taken to a camp, and why did it happen? How did it all happen?
It was in 1940. It was still in May after we had left. How it happened? I told you, we were arrested on the street. And because we had German passports, German papers, they arrested. This was a camp. They had thousands and thousands of women. The men were somewhere else. And that's where they collected us, and that's where we stayed. And a lot of them did not come out because after France was taken over by the Nazis, they shipped them all to Auschwitz. We were just very lucky and fortunate that we got out of that and found our way out.
How did you find your way out?
It takes too long to tell you everything, and I try to make it short. When my husband finally met me, as I told before, in that hotel, we tried to get to the border. And at the border, they were telling us we can't leave because my husband was in the military age and we didn't get an exit visa. So we went back. We tried to get out again a few days later through the German-occupied part of France. They wouldn't let us go through because we were Jewish. So we went again, and somebody told us, there is somebody, if you bribe them with 100 gold dollars. My husband had a small amount of gold collected for that purpose, just in case, because we still thought maybe something happened. So we gave most of what we had to those people, and we went to the same place where we went first. And when our name was read, they let us in.
They let you into where?
Spain.
And then you were done. And then?
We thought we were done. He had a visa, a transit visa through Portugal, go to South America. I forgot which country it was. But that second visa was a false visa. So we took the night train from the border from France to Spain, and came to Madrid and spent a day there because the next train was at night again. We take the night train to go to Portugal. When we came to the border in Portugal, and don't forget we had a 3-year-old child with us, they looked at the visa and the Portuguese visa was expired. So all we had to do, go back to the Portugal consulate and get another visa. So we traveled the third night to Spain, took a cab, went to the Portuguese consulate, and they said we have to first verify our other visum to get there, and if we have that, they give it to us. So we went to the South American consulate. They looked at it and they said, that's not a real visa, that's a false visa. And he just tore up the visa, and there we were stuck. We left some of our belongings at the Portuguese border, and of course when they said it, half of the stuff was stolen. And we sat there, and I think it was the only time I ever said to my husband, I think we better kill ourselves. We didn't know the language, we didn't have any place to go, we didn't have any money, we really didn't know what to do. So we went to the American Express because it was the only thing we could really read and understand that well. So there was a little Jewish man, and he saw us, how desperate we were. And he said, I know what happened to you because same thing happened to me. I live in a very, very low-grade, cheap boarding house. But if that's sufficient for you, you can go there. So we went, and needless to say, it was awful, it was terrible. Nobody could speak my language except one guy, he spoke some French. And we lived there for 4 months. We couldn't get out. We didn't know what to do. And there were a few other people in the same boat like we were, and we got together every day and we said, how are we going to do that? And by the way, the food which we got, we had some horse meat, and it was practically nothing. And one day somebody said, if you can put down so much money, you can get a visa to Havana, to Cuba. And of course we were in touch with the Mays, and my father had some money in Nashville, which he wasn't supposed to, of course. And they put the money out for us. And then on the 19th of May, a year longer, in 1941, after we left, we sailed to Havana and stayed there for a month until we could get our American visa.
During that year, you were on the run for a year,
Yes,
basically.
yes.
What kind of word were you having from your parents back in Belgium, back in Germany?
Yeah. No, in Belgium.
They were in Belgium?
Yes,
Okay.
they lived in 39. They
Okay.
lived in Belgium. At that time, not too bad. At that time, mind you.
Did they have any contact with anyone back in Frankfurt during that period?
No. See, it wasn't bad in Belgium the first few years. But then afterward, I'll get back to that in a little bit. But they were in Brussels and I had some letters from them. But then when we settled in the United States, very shortly after, the war started with America and Germany, and then I haven't heard from them at all. And I thought they were killed.
During that year, when you were trying to get out of Europe, your parents were going to stay in Belgium? Did they?
Well, they couldn't get out anymore. There was no way for them to get out.
And even you who were trying, it wasn't an easy task at all.
For what?
To leave Europe.
No.
What was it like in these other countries, in Spain and Portugal, besides you talked about the economic experiences? Were they aware of what was going on in Germany and east of there? Were you treated differently because you were a Jew on the run from the Nazis?
We were not treated at all as Jews because at that time, Jews did not exist in France. They had no Jews, I mean, openly. And even at the German consulate, we had to prolong our permit to stay longer. Even there, they didn't look at us as Jews, while all Jews in Germany had a J in it. They didn't put a J in anything. We were not Jews to them. There were no synagogues, there were nothing. As a matter of fact, I really like to mention that we met a family who lived in Spain, not as Jews either. And when Passover came, there was a knock on my door, and that guy comes and brings us 2 matzahs. They had received the matzahs from Tangiers, because in Spain it didn't exist. And they said, at least I want you to know that it's Passover. So.
And that was during that year when you were
in Spain. Yes.
So how did you get, what was the May family's connection to your leaving to Cuba? Was there one?
They gave us an affidavit. They sent
to go to Cuba?
To Cuba, you didn't need anything. All you need is cash, money, you know? And they sent it to Cuba, and that's why we could get in. And I may have, I don't think I had a visa. I don't remember that.
What was your family's initial connection to the May family from Nashville? What was the original connection?
My father's sister was married to a May. So they were brothers. So in other
living
words,
in Nashville. She was living in Nashville?
Yeah, excuse me. There's one thing I really wanted to tell you about my parents living through that. You know, they were hiding. Is it okay?
Sure, go right ahead.
My brother, who was with the American Army, with the military police, he was stationed in Paris. And after the war, he was trying to get to Brussels to see if my parents were still alive. We had no idea. And when he came in the place where we used to live, there was a woman who lived with us, and she said, Mr. Levison, your family is fine. They live in such and such address. And my brother went there, and he found my both parents, looking terrible, but they were all very happy. He wrote in that letter for 30 minutes. We didn't do anything but crying. Then they told him a lot of things which happened, but this is one thing which I really like to tell you. They, as I said, they lived in that apartment, and my mother told my father to go and buy some fish. So I went to the fish store and brought the fish home, and my mother said, "You have to take that fish back because it smells." My father said, "I won't do such a thing." So my mother insisted, and he finally went. I never found out if he got his money back, by the way. And when he came back, he saw the Gestapo in front of the house. So he said to himself, "It's no need that I go up because they're after me. If I don't go up and they get my wife, maybe I can be of some help." So he walked around the block and walked until the car was finally gone, and he goes upstairs. The door was knocked in or out, and my mother was there crying, and he said, "What happened?" He said, "The Gestapo came, and when I didn't open the door, they knocked it out, and they said, 'Where's Mr. Leveson?' And she said, 'Mr. Leveson is out of town. When do you expect him?' 'Not until late this evening.' So they said, 'So okay, then we take you with us.' And my mother was a very charming, beautiful woman. Somehow, I still don't know how, she sweet-talked him out of it. And she says, they said, 'You tell Mr. Leveson we need to ask him a few questions and we are coming back later.' Now my father was a very clever man. He had paid an attic room every month or every, just in order to get there in case something would happen to them.
He had paid what?
A room in an attic.
I see. Smart.
And then I don't know if they had already packed before, just in case, or if they packed, I never found out. And they went there, and they lived in that room for a year and a half. No heat, no nothing. And they supported themselves by my mother was knitting, and she knitted for other people. And at night, when it was dark, she went to deliver and got new merchandise to take home. And that's how they maintained their living.
And this was in Belgium?
Yes.
I take it, did they ever tell you, I mean, they were very lucky to be in Belgium as opposed to Germany, were they not?
Oh, yes, sure. Because in Germany, you couldn't do that.
Okay. You were starting to explain to me, when the war first started, did you have contact with the Mays? Did you know that they were going to try to help you get to the United States?
Well, my brother was here already, and I had contact with them. But once the whole mess started, it was very difficult. But I did know that if I needed the help, they would help me. It was just a question when, because the American quota was closed, and there was thousands and thousands of people who wanted to get in, and nobody could get in. But then when the war started, nobody could get out anyway, and that's why we could get our visa very fast while we were in Havana. I hope I make myself clear, but
you do, and when you don't, I just stop you and make you go back.
Good.
What year did you go from Portugal to Cuba?
We never got to Portugal.
Okay. You were in Spain the whole time. What year was it that you went to Cuba?
1940. The whole thing took place from May the 10th until June the 13th, when we finally landed in Nashville.
So you were in Cuba about a month?
Yes.
And was it when you were there that you got in touch with the Mays? Or your brother?
I suppose so. See, you couldn't call in these days. But we must have written them or something. But anyway, they put the money out for us, a certain amount they kept and a certain amount they gave us back when we left the country. So we stayed a month in Cuba, which was very pleasant, really, except that we were very anxious to get started again, because it was a terrible life to be on the run for 13 months.
Why did you, how did you choose the United States as opposed to, at one point you'd mentioned that you wanted to go to Palestine. Why? Was it just because your brother was here?
Yes, yes. Most of my family was here. And we knew that was the easiest place to go. There was no way to go to Palestine in these days. And we wouldn't know where else to go. But that was our final goal.
So did the Mays sign your affidavits to
Yes.
come over?
Yes.
And what day did you come to this country? And did you come through New York or?
No, no. We came, we took the Clipper. You know what the Clipper is? Was an airplane in these days which flew over the ocean. It landed on the ocean and
Like a hydroplane, kind of.
something like that, yes. And we took that Clipper and went from Havana to Miami. And then we took a train and went home. Not home, to Nashville.
What was it like arriving in the United States?
We were so happy that we finally went somewhere where we were hoping that we could stay. It was a wonderful feeling, but I always had a terrible feeling about my parents.
How long had it been, by the time you got to the United States, how long had it been that since you'd heard anything from them?
Oh, I did hear while we were in Spain. But that was very fast. I mean, the mail from Madrid to Brussels went in a day. That was fine. I heard from them even in United States until the 6th of December when the war started and everything was cut off.
How long was it that you didn't hear from them in total?
After the war, when my brother found them.
So for years you
For
didn't
years,
hear?
well, in the beginning, once in a while, I had a little note from them through somebody in Switzerland. But that stopped too. And as a matter of fact, I tried to write through the Red Cross, and each time I got my letter back, and it says, left without any known place. So I thought for sure they'd been sent to Auschwitz. I was just living in hope. Thank God, everything worked out.
When you first arrived in the United States, what did it feel like? I mean, what was your first goal, I guess, if...
To start housekeeping. I had a husband, and in the meantime my child was 4 years old. And not only this, we had to find some work. I worked for the Mays, and my husband worked for, at the time it was Stein and Leitman, and we together made about $25, which was just enough to keep us above water. But then little by little he got raises, and I got a little raise here and a little raise there. So we struggled for a long time because we couldn't take any furniture, we couldn't take any money, so we really lived what you call from hand to mouth. But we were happy that we could accomplish what we really had to, so it was fine.
Did you feel... describe a little bit your feelings after everything you'd been through and what you were starting to be aware of was happening in Europe to other Jews. What did you feel like knowing you had escaped it?
Well, I was very, very happy that I finally was in a country where I can't see where I was free, because I was free in Belgium also, but in a country where I was hoping that I could start making a living again and living a normal life once more, because it's very difficult for someone to understand what it means to live with a small suitcase. I think I had one dress which I had on and another one which a woman made for me while we were in the concentration camp from the mattress material. We took the straw out. You know, some people were dismissed, and that's all I had. So it didn't matter to me. I was happy that I said, well, maybe in a short time we can start living a normal life, which we did. We got a furnished room with somebody in the beginning, and after a week I went to work. I had to, and my husband had work, and with the $25 we could live.
Did you, in both of you, yes? Oh. Did both of you speak English?
Yes.
You were very lucky in that regard. I mean, life could have been much harder.
Yes, yes. I learned it in school, and I went to, like I told you, to a private club, and we spoke one night French and one night English. So I spoke to get by, not real well.
Yet there were probably many differences between your life growing up in Germany and life in the United States. What struck you about the differences at that point when you were new here?
I felt I was nobody. I felt I had nothing. I felt I have to go ahead again and do something, but I wasn't even comparing. See, that year where we've been away on the run really wiped out everything. I could not even compare, except here and there when I saw people that lived a normal life. I said, oh my God, I wished I had that kind of life again. But that was about all. I was too happy that I had a place which I could call my home.
Were people nice to you? I mean, how did people treat a refugee? I mean, I don't mean just your family,
I know what you mean.
People in Nashville.
Well, people are people. Some people were very nice. Some people were nice just to be nice. And some people just ignored us. I mean, people are people all over.
What did you do when you were worried about your parents? Once you got here, the war broke out, right? Mm-hmm. And there was a period of all those years that you were really uncertain about their future. Mm-hmm. Was there anything you could do to...
Absolutely nothing.
Describe your feelings during that period about that, the frustration.
I can only give you one example, and I think that's significant. I went to work, like I told you, and especially in winter time, when I came home in my warm apartment, and I was looking forward so much after all. I worked in the factory first and then in the office, and it was a long, hard day for me. And I opened my door, and it's so nice and cozy and warm, and I was grateful and happy for a second, and then I said to myself, how can I be even happy when I don't even know where my parents are? And I think that's the best way I can describe it.
Did you also think about your childhood friends? Did you wonder what happened to all of them, other Jewish people?
No.
You didn't?
Not in particular. I thought what happens to everybody, you know, but I was so concerned about my parents that all the rest I was trying to wipe out.
Did the community, and when I say the community, I mean Nashville or the American government, or did anybody help you try to get word about your parents?
There was no way. It was completely cut off.
And you know, there's always a lot written and a lot of discussion about whether Americans really knew what was going on in Europe at that time, about the camps. How much did you really know about what Hitler was doing?
We heard here that something happens to the Jews and that they kill them, whichever way we didn't know too well, but we knew, otherwise I wouldn't have been that worried about it. We knew. And the Americans knew it too.
So your feelings during this period of resettling, you were both happy but also very distraught about your family.
Yes, of course.
Any other description of your thoughts and feelings during this period?
Well, all right, let me tell you this. Of course, we try to live a normal life. And every year on Christmas Eve, or on New Year's Eve rather, we were a certain group and we got together. And I never really was very happy. But I remember one year in 1945 it was. We've been with that group on Christmas Eve, or on Christmas Day. You know, we were off and we wanted to be together. And then the same group had a New Year's Eve party. And I still remember I received that letter from my brother where he wrote me that he found my parents. And I don't even know if he mentioned that. Yeah, I did. And I still remember that that Christmas Eve party. Now, don't think we had a Christmas party. It was just a holiday for us, and we just tried to be together. It was very dull for me. And then I got the letter between Christmas and New Year. And I never forget what a wonderful New Year's Eve party I had. And I'm sure it wasn't any different from anything else, but knowing that my parents were alive, that made my whole life differently.
Did they end up coming to Nashville?
Yes, my brother brought them over, you know.
How soon after the war ended?
They came in summer 1946 because he was an American citizen in these days, and because he was fighting in the army. I think they had some preferences. So they came in, I think it was in summer, in June 1946.
As awful as their experiences were,
Yeah.
did they ever talk about how lucky they were in light of what could have happened to them?
Yes, of course. When they talked about what happened to them with that fish story, you know, and it was why they were even hidden in that attic. They were trying to find an, either the British or whoever, the flyer who was parachuted somewhere, and they were really going through. They made a, what do you call it? Looking for him, and they went from house to house, and they guess they gave up or found him. I don't know. Right before they got to their place. And there's one time, and there was another time when they arrested somebody instead of my father. So they knew how lucky they were. Sure.
Did they bring stories with them when they came about things that they knew about from back home that you didn't know?
You mean from Belgium?
From Belgium, or things they might have heard from Germany while they were over there?
It's not that I remember. I mean, it's been so long ago. It's almost 50 years. So I really don't know much about it.
But the reunion must have been wonderful.
Oh, needless to say, I went to New York to pick him up. By the way, you asked me before what kind of feelings I had. I remember one day I went to a funeral. A woman lost her mother who was way up in her 90s or 80s, and she cried something awful. And I said to myself, I would give anything if I could bury my parents here, because I was sure that they were not alive anymore. So, I mean, that shows you how, and when my father, unfortunately, died a year and a half after he was here, when he died, and I was heartbroken, and I visualized myself standing at that grave and having the feelings which I did. And that gave me some consolation.
Knowing that they had come out.
Right.
And that you had gotten to see them again.
Oh, yeah. My mother lived quite a bit longer, but my father died a year and a half later.
How long was it before you really felt at home in this country?
About 5 years. It takes anybody 5 years to make such a tremendous change. Even if you move in another city, it's sometimes difficult to make changes.
And did your son grow up, did he think of himself as an American child?
I ask him sometimes, I asked him now, did you ever feel poor? And he said, not really. While he was young, we had no car. All the other guys had cars. I mean, the parents and all this. But he said, not too bad while he was young. But somebody told me once, he never told me that, said he mentioned to that particular person, he made up his mind he will never be poor. So, you know, it must have stuck with him, but he never let me know. You know, it's different when you're in something or when you look at it from the outside.
Absolutely. I'm just wondering, did you ever feel resentment because you had a really good life in Germany prior to the war? Did you ever think about Hitler, and did you feel any bitterness, the fact that your life was interrupted and you had to start over again?
Of course I do it. I still do. It's not in my life. Maybe my life is better than it would have been in Germany. I don't know. I mean, you can compare. But that's natural when you think about what you had and what you had to give up, even if you have a wonderful life. I mean, we gave up an awful lot. Well, I don't know what life would have had in store for me had I not left, I mean, under normal circumstances. But sure, I mean, my whole life would have been different.
What was your Jewish life like in Nashville when you came here? Did you practice the religion at all?
Yes, my husband was more religious than I was, and we joined the Orthodox synagogue at the time. And because of him, I did a lot of things, and I'm still kind of religious. I mean, I'm holding on to certain traditions.
Tell me a little bit more about the May family. I realize you had a very personal connection because your brother married a May.
Not my brother, my mother's, my father's.
Your father's.
Well, it doesn't matter.
Wait, who was it again? It was your father's.
My father's sister
married a May. Which May?
You heard of Jacob May? His brother.
Okay.
Moses May. You will hear about Moses May later from the people from Höchst.
Oh, I have interviewed some of them already, but I wanted to. We're particularly interested in their story because of something else we may do about that family, and I just wondered if you could talk for a few minutes about what role they played and what kind of feelings you have. I mean, they helped a lot of people, and I wonder how much you thought about that during your transit and your settlement here.
Well, first of all, I felt very grateful to them. Of course, like somebody say, you can't be grateful for the rest of your life. But we were always very close, not close, but I mean, I felt Mortimer was very, very nice to us. And his children, who, one of them lives here, Leon, when we see him, we always feel like we are not family, but part of the family. There's always a warm feeling. Whenever something happens in the family, even now, they don't ignore it, and I won't ignore it either. So there is, because we did have a mutual relative.
And yet they went beyond just their family and helped so many others from Höchst.
Yes.
And I just wonder, what do you think motivated their desire to help people so much?
Humanity. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they gave about 300 some affidavits until they were told that's all they can do. And then Mortimer went around and asked his friends to give him affidavits. See, the people helped people here. They were wonderful when it came to that.
So it's not to look at the negative, but do you often think, why didn't more American Jews do the kind of thing that the Mays did to help others get out?
Even some German Jews didn't help. They were afraid, they didn't want to put their money out. I mean, there are a lot of people who didn't. Now, I had a cousin, she just passed away, Selma Oppenheimer. Her mother bombarded her with letters. She must get out, she must get out. And my cousin didn't really have the money. So she borrowed the money and paid interests for it just to get her mother out. And she did, while other people didn't do that. So, like I said before, people are people.
You mean she borrowed the money from another American?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And she paid interest. She paid so much every month and got her mother out.
Did you feel that what did the Jewish community, once you got out and you were here, did you feel that they were doing enough? Or what were they doing about what was happening in Europe? Was there anything they could do?
Let me tell you something. We came in June 41, right?
Right.
And in December 41, everything was cut off. There was nothing anybody could do anymore. You couldn't write, you didn't hear. Those people who were caught were caught. Some were lucky and were hiding. But officially there was nothing. The only ones who could have done was the government, and as you know, they didn't do very much.
I understand you went back to Europe not all that long ago. Somebody told me that you went back. When was that, and what prompted you to go back?
I went to Europe a couple of times besides that, but I always wanted to go to Frankfurt, and whenever we were ready to go, I didn't have the courage. I just didn't want to go. But then came word out that the city invited former citizens from that town because they wanted us to see that things have changed and this and that and the other. So I decided, why not? I thought it would be exciting to see people because they came from all over the world, my former friends, people I went to school with, some neighbors, and so I said, why not? And I went. But to be very honest with you, I left my feelings behind. I knew already beforehand, I'm not going to get upset, I'm not going to get excited. I take it in. After all, it's been good to be invited and staying in a nice hotel and seeing what's going on and get it out of my system. So when I got there, there was one time when I went to the zoo where I spent so much time when I was a child, and I looked at the pond where I was skating, ice skating. For 30 seconds maybe my eyes were misty, and that was the only time. The house I used to live in was bombed out, a new house. The streets looked different. It didn't affect me at all. A lot of people say they had mixed feelings. I had no feelings. Except I enjoyed very much being with my former, I hadn't seen him in 50, 60 years, and we had a ball. We really did.
Were most of the stories ones that had happy endings? The stories your friends told them, had some of them been through much worse things?
No, that those who I met all got out. And I asked them about what happened to this one, what happened to that one. Well, this one was killed by the Nazis. This one was killed by the Nazis. But those who came, most of them were happy, and there were a couple of them who lost their parents in the Holocaust. And I said to myself, I didn't tell them, I would have never put my foot into Germany if I had lost my parents, regardless of what. But thank God I was very lucky. My father, my mother, all their brothers and sisters, and all my cousins came out. I lost 3 cousins in that we had a large family, so I consider myself very lucky.
What were the Germans like in Frankfurt when you went back?
Well, I only had to deal with younger people, and they were very nice, and they're trying very hard. In fact, I had a letter at home now to write what happened and why it happened and how I feel about it. The younger people really, at least they say, they feel bad and sorry that those things happen, and they want to, make up for that. The people my generation, I didn't see. Well, of course, most of them are gone anyway, but those which were involved in the Nazis, I don't think I saw, maybe one.
Did you told about the bookkeeper or the woman who worked for your father, and some of those things that had surprised you as a young girl.
Yeah.
Did it make you suspicious of the motivation behind the Germans even today? Because you never thought that woman, for example, would have ever had a bad, thought about Jews. And I wondered, were you suspicious of the motivation behind the Frankfurt?
I brought it up quite often. For instance, I went in a store and there's a woman, she was younger than I am, but still I thought maybe she was involved. And everybody said the same thing. Yeah, it was a terrible thing what happened to the Jews. And most of them said I didn't know anything about it. But there was one, I have a friend, they used to live here in Nashville. And she was a little child when that whole thing started. And she told me, she asked her father at one time, after she was grown up, Dad, did you ever know what happened to the Jews? And most people in Germany said they didn't. But he said to her, yes, I did. And she said, why didn't you do anything about it? And she says, you know, there was no way I could do, because the moment I would have opened my mouth, they would have sent me off just like the Jews. So I really was a coward, he said, but I couldn't do it. But
This was a German friend?
Yes.
This story you told about the little girl and her father, was this a German youngster?
Yes, yes.
And it was somebody you knew growing up?
No. I've never had, in fact, I never had met her. She and her husband lived in Nashville.
You met her afterwards.
And I met him after they moved back to Germany. And for some reason she, as a matter of fact, let me tell you why I really got so close with her. When my parents lived in Germany, then that was already when the Nazis started, but it wasn't really that bad yet. And my parents had a Gentile couple we were very friendly with, and they had a young guy who was with the Hitler Youth, and he came at night, and the back steps, they had a step for the delivery and all that, upstairs, and brought my parents what they couldn't get, eggs and milk and butter, whatever. And when those people, when she was already back in Germany, and he came once to visit, I said, it would really help me if you would find out the whereabouts of that, now he's a man, of course, in his 60s, where he is, because I like to do something for him. And she right away tried very, very hard to find him. She never did, by the way, but she went through God knows what. And that's how we even got acquainted, and we wrote each other letters, and we phoned. And when she heard that I was coming to Germany, she said she couldn't wait to meet me, and I really wasn't disappointed when I got there. She was wonderful, and they drove us to little towns nearby where I really wanted to. They did anything and everything they could.
She was not Jewish?
No.
She was a German
Yes.
who had lived in Nashville, and through your Nashville
Right.
connection is how you got in touch with her.
Right.
Were there others in that community who you might have, did you run into any non-Jews in Frankfurt when you
No.
went back that you had known prior to the war?
No, I wasn't even interested.
You
But
didn't-
I wouldn't even have known how to get in touch with them. I hadn't been with too many non-Jews to begin with. Children I played with and all that, but that's all.
Were there any Jews in Frankfurt when you went back recently?
Yes, there are about 6,000 now, and they have several synagogues, and they have a lot of things. But let me tell you something. There was a guy, we had a get together, and I was trying to get a ride home because I couldn't walk well, and my cousin couldn't walk well. She went with me, my husband didn't want to go. And his name was Levi. He was an American citizen, but he lived in Germany. And I said, Mr. Levi, how is life in Germany? He said, well, it's a very good life. It's really good to live here. But this is exactly what he said, our suitcases are always packed.
Once they saw it happen to other people, they always knew it could happen again. Is that his basic thought?
Listen, history repeats. It doesn't look like it's going to happen now, but you never know. You never know.
They were free to observe their faith, though. I mean,
Oh,
were they?
now?
I mean,
Oh,
I'm
dear.
talking about even when you went back a few years ago.
Yeah, I'm talking about that. It's only 3 years. Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, very much so. There's much more religious life in Germany now than here in Nashville, believe it or not.
That doesn't surprise me. Did you get any criticism from others for going back?
Yes and no. They never said, how can you, or how could you? But they said, I wouldn't go back for anything. Okay, I mean, that's as much as the criticism was, and I could see that they didn't approve of it. But I went, but believe me, I don't think I want to go a second time, not because I have hard feelings, but I'm not interested. The town, the city left me cold. It's not what it used to be. In fact, I felt like I was in another city. Didn't even feel like I was in my hometown, where I had such happy times.
Is that because, in large part, because of everything you know that had gone on since?
I don't think so. I can't tell you because, like I said, I had no feelings. I don't know. I did not go around and say, "Whoa, what you did, what you didn't," except one day they took us on a city tour in the bus, and every 10 minutes they stopped and said, "This is Mr. Watchmadodel. He gave 100,000 marks for the university," or "This is," I'm just using that amount, or "This is what Mr. So-and-so, and he did the university, and he did this, and this one did that." And I said to my friends, it makes me sick to think what the Jews really have done for the community and what happened afterwards.
So they were pointing out on these tours some of the things that these Jewish citizens had done.
Yeah.
Do you know, because you left, but I wonder if your parents or anyone ever told you, did the people of Frankfurt in general, I mean, how were they towards helping the Jews once the problem started in the 30s? Did they do anything to help?
They were afraid. I'm sure there were quite a few. I know of people who turned their back on certain things which they did. And I know people when they packed and they were not supposed to take certain things and they didn't look. I mean, I'm sorry, I have to repeat myself all the time. People are people. There were some horrible, horrible Germans, but I'm sure there were some also who just went along with the rest because there was nothing else for them to do.
Do you think you look at life differently because of your pre-war experiences and what you went through?
Yes.
How so?
First of all, I think things don't matter so much anymore. My neighbor, at one time, she broke all her dishes, nice china, and she cried something awful. And I said, look, not only did I lose all my dishes, I lost everything what I have. So don't cry. So this is the attitude. Of course, I must say, to be very honest, you lose some of that feeling. I mean, you want to get ahead. When we were in Spain, I remember I told you in that terrible place, the best thing we ever had to eat was one fried egg and some French fried potatoes. And I said, if I ever come to America, that's what I'm going to have for a delicacy. Well, you know good and well, you change your attitude after a while. Or they used to say, if I only can get out of out of Germany, I would be too happy to live in an attic. Well, I don't know anybody of all the people who came out of Germany who live in an attic now.
But yet you appreciate little things in a way you never would have? Whether it's
You're
food
talking about now or later?
Now, any time in the last 40 years since you've...
No, you wanted me to be honest with you. No.
Really? So...
Well, no, but the only thing is because you keep forgetting those things. But to give you an example, a year and a half I was very, very sick. I really was closer to death than anybody. Miraculously, I snapped out of it. Ever since, and I really mean it, I said to myself, nothing upsets me anymore except health-wise. Nothing can upset me. And I think, of course I don't have that many years left anyway, but I think that I will stick with. But what happened 50-some years ago, I don't think anybody says, oh, I'm so glad I saved my life. I mean, that's again, I must say, human beings are human beings.
What you've been through, did it affect how you brought up your son at all? I mean, did it have any...
I don't think so. I mean, I couldn't give him what I would have liked to give him. And I think that's one reason why he's giving his children everything. But the other sense said, no, we gave him a good education. We try to save enough to do that. He's a Vanderbilt graduate from law school. And no, I don't think so.
Is there anything else that you want others to know, anything at all about your experiences, your thoughts, something that you want? I mean, these tapes are being done in part just so that there is a story saved forever and ever for the Nashville community to listen to and for children to learn from. Is there any message that you want others to remember about everything you've been through?
Yes, there's one. Money should not be an obstacle to help people. Because if it hadn't been for money, a lot more people could have been saved. That's about what goes through my mind quite often.
And is there any anecdote or any historical fact that I left out that I didn't? I mean, is there anything else you'd like to tell us about this whole 60-year period that we've talked about?
I can't think of anything significant right now. I mean, there are a lot of things which happen, and I'm sure after I'm through with you on the way home I will remember, but there's nothing really to think about. I was happy. That was the happiest day of my life when I heard that my parents were alive. And I had a lot of good things, but this was the best thing what happened to me. But even this fades out, because life goes on.
There's a lot of emphasis put in this country, in Jewish communities, about remembering the Holocaust, remembering what happened. Is that a smart thing that we do, you think?
We have to, because if it is forgotten, it's so much easier to start all over again. See, and what I think more than anything else is really, and I just come back from Israel, we need that country in case, God forbid, something happens. And I've seen a lot of things while I was in Israel, which people really don't know here.
And one thing I have to ask you, just because I'm curious, in light of what's going on right now, how do you feel about the reunification of Germany?
I personally don't like it.
Why?
Because the Germans, when they get stronger, they can easier start again. I mean, they had the First World War, and the Second World War could have been eliminated if the other countries had been more aware of it. But before the war, I don't know if you know that, they started getting the weapons again, and you know what they're trying to disarm now, and they hadn't. But if they are strong again, God knows what's going to happen. I mean, that's my personal feeling.
Is that you think your personal feeling is a result in part of being from Germany and knowing German people?
Yes.
People make a lot of the German mentality. People talk a lot about this ingrained nature to be both productive and perhaps a little bit too organized, if you know what I mean. And I just wonder what you think about that. Is that a lot of hogwash, or is there something to that?
I think there's something to it. I really do. The Germans as such are very cruel. They are. I mean, they try to make up for what has happened. But their attitude is cruel. This is just a very, I don't know if it's interesting to you. I have always been afraid of dogs, and I never knew why. And only about 10 years ago, a song came to me which my mother sang when I was a little child. And this child goes, go to sleep. Sleep, my dear child, the wind is blowing and the little dog is barking, and he bits the beggar and he tore his pants. What kind of a business is that to sing to a child? You know, when my mother sang it to me, I didn't think anything about it. Or take those stories like Hansel and Gretel or Little Red Riding Hood, how horrible they really are, and that shows the attitude of the Germans. I mean, that's my opinion, and a lot of people agree with me.
Cliff, is there anything?
Did you ever question your religion? You know, you as a Jew were being persecuted. Did you ever say, well, you know, why am I in a religion? Why can God let things like this happen?
I'm not questioning my religion from that point of view, but because I'm a very proud Jew, and as a matter of fact, I know somebody very well who is a missionary, and we are very friendly. And I once told her, no matter what we went through, I'm a very proud Jew, and I would never even think of not being Jewish. But on the other hand, like I said, when I was in Israel, my family is very religious, and I said, there's something I don't understand. God created the world. He wanted people to live in the world. And they said even He created them in His own image. Why is so much suffering? And I'm not talking about Jews, I'm talking about the world. Look what the underprivileged countries in Africa, what they suffer. No rain, no food, no nothing. I mean, that I question quite often, but not as a Jew, as a human being. Am I still on that thing?
Mm-hmm.
Anything else, Clifton?
I think that'll do it.
Okay, I hope it
It was excellent, excellent, really. You were